Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Rowan Neufeld, the events coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. From this end, we're streaming live from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Plains Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. Treaty 6 is also the homeland of the Métis Nation, one of Saskatchewan's founding peoples. I'm so pleased that you're joining us this afternoon for the launch of This Strange Visible Air by Sharon Butala. So thanks for being here, Sharon. She's somewhere in there. We'll get her on screen in a moment here. And we are also very lucky to have Elizabeth Phillips joining us as a guest host today. I'd also like to extend our thanks to Freehand Books and Kelsey Attard, especially for working with us on today's event. So before I introduce our host for the afternoon, I have a couple Zoom housekeeping items. We've enabled live auto captions, which you can access by clicking the live transcript button along the bottom of your screen. There's also a Q&A box for you to submit any questions you may have for Sharon, and we'll have some time towards the end of the event to get to those. And Sharon Butala, as many of you know, is an officer of the Order of Canada, has published 21 award-winning books of fiction and nonfiction. And she lived in Saskatchewan for most of her life and now lives and writes in Calgary. And our host for today, Elizabeth Phillips, was the director of the Banff Centre's Emerging Writer Intensive for 8 years. She's the author of 4 collections of poetry, most recently Torch River. In 2015, she published her first novel, The Afterlife of Birds, also through Freehand Books. And it was the winner of the City of Saskatoon Book Award, as well as a finalist for the Amazon First Novel Award. She's a former editor of Grain Magazine and is now the newly appointed acquisition editor for Thistledown Press. And she lives in Saskatoon. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Phillips, who is here somewhere. Oh, there she is. Go. Welcome.
Ta-da. Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to have Sharon come on screen, I hope, any minute now. I think you might have. There we go. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Liz.
So I think we were going to start off with you reading. Is that the idea? Okay. Yeah. From a selection from the essays.
So I'll read one selection and then stop and we talk and then I read the other, or all the whole thing.
It's up to you. Doesn't matter to me. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to. I never know whether I should start or finish with this one called This Strange Visible Air, which is the title of the book, so that people know, because it's a weird title. And this will be, I think this will be no more than 5 minutes at the most, and probably under that.
Okay.
When I was 23 and the exhausted mother of a sleepless first baby, I lay down one evening for a nap, and instead of finding the blessed oblivion I longed for, found myself in another universe. Here, our baby lay sleeping in his carriage on the lawn and under the rich green foliage of the gnarled elms that lined our backyard. This was our yard, our grass, our trees, our sidewalk, our rickety, once white picket fence. But this homey, familiar scene was surrounded by, occurred within air that, though translucent, was pebbled or textured. I could see the air. The entire scene, including the air, was utterly still, not the stillness of the living room when you first come home, nor the stillness of a crowd watching something odd in the sky, but a stillness that was itself alive. Nothing ticked or moved, no voice spoke. The scene and its meaning were whole, which I saw at once, and I saw also at once that it was inarguable. It simply was. Everything in the universe is made of the same material. The trees, the grass, the air, my baby too, everything except the narrow, chipped cement path that had no life. It was dead. All that was alive, this strange visible air, the trees, the grass, and the baby, were not presented as people, not people, animate, not animate, conscious, not conscious, more meaningful, less meaningful, but as all of the same piece. Nowhere, not ever in my life had I seen such beauty, beauty that only the cement path marred. I'm going to skip a section and then go to, I observed during my 33 years on the remote ranch and hay farm belonging to my husband and to me, that whenever visitors came, what they most wanted was to be outside on the land. As the day outside wore on, their faces became flushed. They laughed a lot in a bubbling up childlike way, in a kind of ebullience that is usually otherwise induced mostly by cocktail parties. They exuded happiness, even joy. Their much battered souls had undergone soothing, even healing. Their day out of the city wilds and inside the landscape had been a sojourn in a kind of paradise. The sense of a looming, healing presence, I think, permeates all of us when we are in nature. We become specifically aware of it if we're not focused on birding, not cracking open rocks, not hiking X miles or searching for something, a particular grass, butterfly, fly, or lichen, but simply being there, especially if we can also stop the constant worrying of the consciousness, the questioning, the whining, the anger. At least these are the things I have to stifle, and learn to be alone, to quietly walk and listen and see. In fact, to see what is always there, but that we can only otherwise sense or dimly perceive or fail to perceive, an oxymoron, a contradiction, a sortie into another world than the rational and logical, even scientific one in which we commonly live. I'm skipping some more. Now, I am 79 years old. I'm now 81, so this is 2 years old. And my sojourn on this planet is nearly over. For more than 50 years, I contemplated a vision of the universe, trying to understand it as the background to how to live and to find a way to integrate it into my ordinary daily life, and mostly failing. Not long ago, early on a chilly Sunday morning, I walked the path that winds through the trees at the Weaselhead Natural Area on the edge of my city, which becomes wilderness, the wetlands, then prairie, then the foothills, and on into the unvanquished towering Rocky Mountains. I was alone. The natural area was quiet, even though Calgary droned to the north, east, and south of me. I stopped walking to savor the beauty and whatever delicate thing emanates from a forest that is still and empty of people. It was then that I saw again the fabric of the universe. Once again, it became visible to me, textured so as not to be invisible, this time the palest sandy pink. What had so gently become visible, or my vision mysteriously cleared so that I could see it, is always present. Within this colored, motionless, indeed sentient air, the trees stood, the shrubs and bushes, the grasses, all still and soft. And I saw that at that moment, I walked within nature, and I myself existed as a part of the benign fabric of the universe. Time passed. I walked delicately on, immersed in wonder. So that's the first reading I picked. And then because I think most people who are watching and listening are here in Saskatoon, I thought that I would read the second one from, this is my summing up finally of the Alex Wachar case. I don't suppose that I'll write anything else about it. Unless maybe when I'm on my deathbed, I might say a thing or two. So this essay, it took me, first thing I did was I wrote a 27-page essay, and my editor, who's Naomi Lewis in Calgary, really good editor, she said very politely what it boiled down to was, this is too long. There's a lot of other stuff she might have said, but didn't. So I wrote the whole thing all over again. I just started again, came into 16 pages. And this is much, much closer to what I really think. The other one was just all over the place. So I'm just going to pick paragraphs out running through it. So it may seem disjointed. So that means you have to buy the book in order to read the whole thing in order. Okay, the murder remains unsolved, I called it. 2021 marks 59 years since beauty queen Alexandra Wicharik was beaten, raped, and murdered, and her body buried in a shallow grave in a copse of trees near the weir on the northeast bank of the South Saskatchewan River in Saskatoon. Nobody doubted then nor doubts now that her killer was a man, not a woman, or possibly more than one man, that probably they were young, that she had refused them sexual favors, and that when they tried to force her, she fought back with all her strength and tried to escape. I'm putting a period in. There's actually a comma there. Will become self-explanatory. What caused the rumor in Alex's case that the police had identified the culprit but were protecting a prominent person was, as far as I can see, not much more than their continuing failure to catch the killers, or, there might have been more than one. Of course, in some cases, this explanation, protection of a prominent person, has turned out to be true, but nobody has ever made public any evidence that it happened this time. And despite the fact that suspicion continues to linger after nearly 60 years, the theory must remain just that, a rumor. Besides this obvious mystery, two more remain to this day. The first is, did she have a single killer, or were there two or possibly three young men involved? And the second is, outside of the murder and police response to it, why is it that to this day, 59 years later, instead of long ago forgetting it, Alex's story remains of unusual interest to the people of Saskatoon? The first I have finally resolved in my own mind. I now think she had only one killer. The second I tried to answer in a book I wrote about the case, an answer too long to write here. Later, I wrote a second book stemming from my experience with the crime, and this one was fiction, Zara's Dead. Okay, skipping a bunch of paragraphs. It was something like 23 years ago when I was at a woman's lunch in Saskatoon, and not having lived in Saskatoon for many years, I inquired in a lackadaisical way if anybody knew if her killer had ever been caught. I was told of a retired police officer who couldn't let the case go, who still wanted to know who had killed Alex. From there, I began to ask questions, getting more and more deeply involved in what was known about that night, reading the paucity of newspaper accounts of the time, reviewing whatever official documents I could get access to, interviewing people, talking with her family members, and hearing their stories about Alex and about the days and weeks leading up to the night she was killed and the ensuing almost 3 weeks to May 30th, 1962, when her body was at last found. Now I'm going to skip more. 10 years ago, 10 years after that woman's lunch, 46 years after Alex's murder, I finally published my book, The Girl in Saskatoon, a meditation on friendship, memory, and murder. Part journalism, part memoir, and in a large part, I see now, a sort of sociology of the 1950s and early 60s for women in Saskatoon. The fact that in the couple of weeks immediately after its publication, my book sold 400 copies in this same bookstore I'm sitting in right now in Saskatoon is proof of the community's unflagging interest in the case. I write this essay because I'm 80 now, and because I was 14 when I first met Alex, and because her story flared up again, unforgettable, ever since she was killed at barely 23 when I was 22. In my 2008 book, Unable to Identify Her Killers, I tried to instead to understand the city's enduring obsession with this crime. Now I would like to get to the bottom of my own continuing preoccupation with it. Doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, skip another 2 pages. I began my research into her case with a plan that I repeated endlessly to everybody, that I was only trying to find out the true story of what had happened the night she was killed, not to identify who killed the crime. I wasn't trying to catch her killer. Everybody thought I was. I kept saying that I wasn't. I thought I wasn't. I would say, I live 5 hours out of the city. I have no connections to help me and no training as an investigator. How can I possibly expect to find her killer or killers? At the start, in my own mind, and for years after, even after my book was published, I reiterated this disclaimer to anybody who said I was trying to solve the case. It was only in these last few years, as I've grown older and then older again, that I've realized that there wasn't any difference between the two aims, or what little difference there might have been existed only in my mind, because while I might have been shockingly ambitious as a writer, I otherwise saw myself as having no agency in the world and was also dubious about my own gifts in any direction you'd care to name. And I was also generally timid of authority, and specifically of the authority of the police. So I couldn't say, I'm here to find the killer or killers. I would have died of embarrassment at such audacity, and I knew such an admission would be a direct challenge to the decidedly scary all-male police force. As I was only a somewhat shy, small, an inch shorter than Alex, non-beautiful, aging white female who knew she was way out of her depth and was at first anyway, scared to death about what she was trying to do. Now I'm skipping lots of pages, coming in toward the end. One of the tasks of the elderly is to try to sum up our lives, to make sense of them as best we can. Such an enduring theme as the murder of Alex Wichart surely matters in my life story. The 10 years I spent directly researching it and writing about it, the way I still think about it so often, I need to put it in its correct place. But I don't know what that correct place is. I suppose I can at least say that it is the only time in my life I inserted myself into somebody else's story, somebody not a character I invented, not a family member, not even a good friend. Also, I think I was faithful in what I told about my findings to those who still cared. I have no pangs of conscience there. Over those 23 years since 1998, when I began thinking about Alex's murder, I learned a lot. I learned about the corruption that seems ineradicable and exists at all levels of society. I learned about class in a society that thought itself classless. I learned about misogyny, which I had always known about and known by name since the second wave of feminism in the 70s. I learned about evil and that it just might be incarnate. I might have grown up because of it. I might have quit kidding myself about who I am. Also, slowly over the years, I have begun to see better what I specifically need to fear and to separate most of that from what doesn't need to be feared. Now at 80, my fears come mostly, but not all, from being an old woman in an old woman hostile world. Eventually, I even came to a moment when I thought, maybe I even think, that I knew who killed Alex, although he is dead, and I have not a shred of proof, and without any, will never say his name. I believe, and it seems worth saying, that never, not for 1 second, did he forget what he did. Even after the sound of her screams had faded out of his brain, long after he washed off her blood and the scratches and the place where she had pulled out his hair had healed. I think he didn't sleep after that what sleep he got was filled with her death, the feel of her face against his fist, the sound of her skull made when he broke it. I screwed up that last line. Anyway.
Yes, very powerful. Both of those readings are very powerful.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that you read two pieces. One about the title, that's kind of a large, almost a spiritual, a large look at a spiritual question, and the other is a very close look at something sociological, and on the ground and in the ground. In your case, yes. I wanted to ask you first of all about the title essay. I think it's a great title. I really like it. I like titles that take you interesting places, and it doesn't, the subtitle is Essays on Aging and the Writing Life, and it's maybe less about those things than a lot of the other essays. So why did you put it front and center?
The Strange Visible Air?
Yeah.
I didn't have a title. I didn't know what to call it, and I sure didn't have a subtitle. And you know how you're a writer, you know how you flip through the pages and skim read, looking for something that will jump out that maybe you didn't think of. And I saw that phrase and I thought, I have lots of processes beyond me before a book appears that I can hold it in my hand. And I don't have, maybe I sort of have a veto, but I thought, I'll give him that title and we'll see what happens. And one word about it, So I thought, can't be too bad. But the subtitle was my agent's. She sent me a message one day and said, I've got a subtitle for you. And I thought it was fabulous, Essays on Aging and the Writing Life, because it does encompass the subject matter that more readers would be interested in than the spiritual stuff, I think.
Yes. And it does cover everything in the book, really, because even the essays that are less about those two things, there's still the context of looking back. You're looking back at that murder and your previous work about it.
Yeah.
So it's in the context of your life looking back.
That's right. Yeah. And of course, if you're looking in essays, if you're looking for big themes in your life to write essays about, in my case, I was, because it's kind of memoirish in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The getting to know how to live in nature and beginning to understand some things about nature that it's pretty hard to come to if you live in a city. Was a huge part of my life and my writing for years and years. And so that seemed like that was one theme that I couldn't just pass by. I would have, but I had actually, that was a talk that I gave for the Nature Conservancy when they did their series of talks in prairie cities, and they were talking about grasslands. So they asked me to be one of the speakers, and the other speakers are specialists. They know about native prairie grasses, or they know about, I don't know, soils and so on.
Yes.
And this is what I know about. Yeah. So I wrote that, and then I thought, oh, great, there's one essay I don't have to write. It's already written.
That's a writer's cheat.
Yeah, right, sort of. Yeah. And, if you have to make speeches, it's really great if you can fit them into a book afterwards.
Yeah. We don't want to waste any of our labor.
That's for sure. And we don't want to work too hard either.
Well, I have the sense that you have worked very hard on these essays, though. Because, what really struck me was, over and over, you're talking about trying to come to some wisdom.
Yeah.
The old cliche about wisdom and age, and wanting to articulate what you have learned over the course of your life. And in the book, there are essays that we would expect from the title and the subtitle, on mortality and loneliness and the physical difficulties of aging. But I wanted to ask you also about the pleasures or the advantages or the gains. I really loved, there's a line in the essay, Inglorious on the LRT.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there's a lovely line When I finally got off the train, I might have rolled around in the snow if I were 40 years younger, with laughter at the fascinating sights the universe occasionally cooks up. So could you talk a little bit about those pleasures or advantages, or the lighter spots in the book?
Oh, well, yeah, I do tend to lean to the deeply serious, don't I? So let me see the lighter spots. Well, the essay called Cold Ankles had some funny spots in it, like my refusal to admit that there was a gas leak in my car.
Yes.
I still don't know what on earth was the matter with my head that I would, as soon as the smell went away, I just said, yeah, it was nothing. And this went on for days. And finally, a workman working on my balcony who said, your gas, propane, gas barbecue link is turned on. Somebody's turned it on. And he turned it off, and then we could still smell gas. So that's when things stopped being funny and got serious.
Yes.
Although it's very, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of enjoyment in your essay, about friendship.
Oh my gosh. When I started, what happened was Phyllis Bruce, who was my editor at HarperCollins for over 20 years, she then moved to Simon and Schuster, and she commissioned me to write another memoir. And I had already started on a book on my own on growing old in this culture, in this place, in this time, if you're female. And it had a chapter on friendship, as well as ones on having to readapt how you dress, how you cut your hair, what you do with your hair, makeup, and all that. It was a little of everything. And so when I was working on this, I'm trying to avoid having to write another whole essay, which can take months. And I always liked that friendship chapter. I wrote it in there. And so I just pulled it out. It had never been published, and adapted it. And when I had been writing it, and when I rewrote it for this book, I left out a number of friends. I mean, it could have gone on forever, because I've lived life in a number of different places in different ways. And once I started writing about it, thinking about the people who were so important to me in my life, I began to really get a sense of the importance of friendship. And that had started, I mean, I wouldn't have thought of it otherwise, but it started with the thing that women always tell each other: spend your midlife making friends with women, because when you're old, you're more likely than not going to be alone, and your friends will save your life. Well, I was writing about that, as how true that is, because women live longer than men. Everybody I know is widowed practically, and some have family close, and some are like me. My family's in Ontario or BC, or Nova Scotia. So I really am on my own. And then I started thinking about the deeper meaning of friendship and the thread of friendship in a life. And I don't have any friends going back to when that first little French girl, when I was 6 years old. I still think about her, I've never seen her since. I don't have anybody that goes back, because I moved around so much. But I still am in contact with a girl who was in my grade 8 class at 13, here in Saskatoon. And it was just so lovely. It was as if these threads the loose ends were getting tied up as I went through all these many friends, and the different things that I learned from these people, and really we're talking about love, it's if I had any kind of a real Protestant religious background, I could tell you what it's called, agape and all that. I don't know which one it is. But it was definitely a kind of love in every case. And why should that thread be broken? I'd like to know. I do have some very close friends I never see or hear from anymore. I think it's illness mostly. But I miss them every day, And when you begin to understand that, your life widens hugely.
Something that comes to mind, came to my mind as you were talking. You're looking back over a whole lifetime, and I wondered about your sense of your audience at different times at different ages as a writer. Like, do you feel a different sense of audience, or are you writing to a different audience, or have you freed yourself a bit from the sense of an audience?
Yeah, I could answer every part of everything you said differently. But when I started writing, I was writing without realizing it for my mother and my sisters. I had four sisters once upon a time. And we used to, if there was a book that everyone was reading, one of us would take it from the library, and then in the space of 2 weeks, four of us would read it, because we were really, readers. And so those were the people I was writing my books for. I knew what they liked. I knew what they appreciated, what they wanted to read about. And that would be a lot of my women friends too. And then I often would ask myself, I was hugely ambitious, and I was always trying to figure out what other writers who were very successful had that I didn't have. And damn it, I was going to figure out what it was, and I was going to get it and do it, And so I realized finally that one thing that was different from the writers, female writers I knew who were not huge successes yet, and the men, was that the men always had a sense of themselves as writing for the world. By gosh, they had the answers kind of. And women just didn't do that. They were much more intimate and so on. So I thought, can I shake myself of this sense of writing for women of my own age and class and background? And I tried. At first I would force myself. I would say, oh, wait a minute. What's like an English speaker in India going to think of this line? And then want to broaden it out a bit, Then I stopped even thinking about that. And then as I got really old, I began to think there was something else entirely that began to happen to me. You know how in creative writing classes, the first things they always tell you is, and workshops, is you got to get rid of your censor. So you think that's what teachers told you, your church, your mom and dad, etc. And your class. My God, the class you were raised within is just, the more fancy the class, the more restrictive is my opinion, So I was lucky to be born poor and in a messed up place, French on one side and not on the other, British kind of on the other. And I tried to write like the men wrote, in the sense there was nothing I would be afraid to say, no bad language I would be afraid to use. Still haven't written a sex scene. I don't think, well, forget it. I'm 81. Not going to happen. And when I started Season of Fury and Wonder, which is my second last book, and it's a collection of short stories about old women, I did not plan that book in any way, but for 10 years, all I'd been thinking about was women being old. And I woke up one morning and I had a whole short story in my head, and I hadn't written a short story for 14 years, and I hadn't because I couldn't. And I just leaped out of bed and sort of threw myself across the room into my chair in front of my computer and started typing. And I pretty much didn't stop till I had 10 short stories, none of which I planned ahead of time. They just came and came. And came. I wouldn't stop. Some great conduit between the muse, the creative flow, or whatever you want to call it, had finally opened up. And I was at least 75, maybe older.
And that had never happened before?
No. And it was little bits and pieces, wouldn't I get these visionary moments, And it had nothing to do with how men write and how women write. Nothing. Purely personal. And then when I sat down to write the essays, I had the same sense that it wasn't that I needed to be able to use bad language and write sex scenes, but it was that, and violence, the violence in some books, just whoa. It was that I needed to connect. Oh, I hate using cliches, but unfortunately they're true. The authentic inner person that I am with this creative world that's out there. And once I
Yes.
did that, it didn't matter to think about writing like men or writing for the world or writing
Yes.
for my mom, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm hoping that once it's opened up, it will never shut down again, but who knows?
We can't count on anything, can we?
No, we
As
should.
writers.
No,
No, no,
as
no.
people, as
As
humans.
people. Yes. One other thing I wanted to ask you, I think we've got time for one more question. I think of this in terms of the story about the murder. In the essay Passing Through, you use the phrase the divine power of the feminine.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this collection has a lot to do with that in many ways. Could you talk a bit about that?
I had never thought of that. And I will have to think about it to be more coherent about it.
Yeah.
But yes, an awful lot of my most private life, that is my dreams and the times when I wake up and I know whatever happened wasn't a dream, you know, have been about not the patriarchal God, you know, the guy with the long beard, but a woman who is so simple, so straightforward. She's always middle-aged in many different guises in my dreams. And she doesn't speak. And in the first dream, the most prominent thing about her was her absolute power, and that which didn't emanate, you just knew it, and the total lack of affect, completely without affect. And in the last dream, which was just a few nights ago, the woman appeared again. And I had wanted to go out of this place that we were in because I thought then it was full of mice, but it was actually full of bees. I realized afterwards when I woke up, I couldn't see them clearly, and they weren't mice, they were bees. And I thought, well, she won't want to go with me, but at least I'll ask her. So I said I wanted to go out, and she looked a bit uncertain, then she followed me. So, whoa, eh?
Yes, wow.
When I think of the first dream 30 years ago, you know, it's quite a progress.
Yes, yes. And as you've been talking today, I mean, the women come into it so much, friendship with women, that the murder, which had to do with a woman who was sexually assaulted and killed basically because she was a woman.
And a beautiful one.
And a beautiful woman, yes. Yeah. So it feels like the essays are driven by that in many ways. Even the lighthearted moments, you know, the what was it, Inglorious on the LRT, you have that lovely ending speaking to the little girl.
Still makes me tear up when I think of that little sweetheart. You know, sad she was being, you know, I can't read it myself, you know, it was write it. I needed a mother.
But that was one of the gifts really of having to take public transport. It was meeting someone like that. Yeah.
I haven't been able to since COVID began, because that's one of the places where people who are forced to take public transport every day are the ones who are getting COVID, among the ones who are COVID. So, and the other thing is that part of my aging process has been that my sense of balance is pretty much shot. And if I start to fall, I can't stop. And you cannot ride on the LRT when it's crowded if you can't hang on to something. And it's awful to fall on people, which I have done. So I think my LRT days are over.
But you've got the gifts to take forward then.
Absolutely. And I think I really do believe that people who are fortunate enough to clog up the city streets with their cars with one person in them all the time I understand why they do it. I did it myself years ago, but they're missing life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
They're missing the real world out there.
Okay. I think we have some questions for you from our viewers. Here's a question from Maureen. During COVID times, books have been lifelines to bigger worlds. What authors have inspired you?
Oh, they all inspire me. I can't imagine. I mean, I've never read Stephen King because in the days when, like all of us, we were driving out to high schools to give readings to kids who wished we'd drop dead, that sort of thing. I had by this time read a page or two of one of Stephen King's novels and been so appalled and shocked and disgusted that I would never have anything to do with him again. Never read any of his stuff. And when I said this to the kids, they were just, and then they started defending him like crazy, and I thought, oh my God, what's wrong with this world, So I learned something though in that, which was, don't try to be what you're not. I guess this is what this guy is, that he can sit around by the hour and dream up the most god-awful stuff you ever thought of. Well, I can't do that.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of inspiration. Don't do that. And of course, there are all the old books that everybody has read. Madame Bovary. I wanted to write a prairie Madame Bovary until the day came when I realized that wasn't our kind. I thought I was surrounded by Madame Bovarys, and then I realized that no, I was surrounded by tough prairie women, who'd survived stuff Madame Bovary had no clue about. And let me see, Knut Hamsun. I was very much inspired by his very serious books about the starving working classes of Denmark, the agricultural people, and I wanted to be a chronicler of the same people in Canada. But it never got me very far because most readers are urban people, and urban people are not very interested in country people. So, but I wanted to pay tribute to them because they are extraordinary as a class of people. They really are. And fascinating to me.
Okay, here's another question. Would it make it, this is from someone called Melvin, would it make an interesting story to give voice to the divine mother of the dream?
Oh, hi, Melvin. I don't know if I could. What a great idea. I'm just not so sure I could pull it off. I was trying to imagine it because she's going to have to be a character in a story. And what I'm seeing, what's just appearing, is an office with a bunch of women working in it. And one of them is a manifestation of. And the movies, this, Melvin, movies in the 40s and maybe even into the 50s. I'm thinking of an Ava Gardner film. They used to be often about divine presences in the midst of life. Another one, everybody's favorite, was with Peter Falk. It was The Angels of Berlin. Have I got that?
Yes. Oh, yes. The Wim Wenders. Yes.
That's it. One of my favorite, all-time favorite movies.
That was a beautiful movie. Yeah.
Maybe the 80s that came out.
Yes. Quite old. Yeah.
So, but I'm thinking way back that Ava Gardner film where she's a statue and she comes to life because, her was like divine. It was a divine beauty. But my woman is in my dream. She's not beautiful. She's just ordinary, except for this hair, sleek, pale blonde hair. Don't ask me where that came from.
Well, we know hair is powerful.
Yeah. And if you read books on mythology and symbology and so on, as I'm sure you do as a poet, hair is always representative of the spiritual.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for one more question. I don't know if we don't have one from the audience, but I wanted to ask you about, Did you in some instances treat yourself as a bit of a character in your essays? Like, did you kind of bring over a little bit of your fictional mojo to see yourself as a character?
I never thought, you asked the most incredible question, Elizabeth. I do this for a living. I never thought in those terms. I always tried to be faithful to what I really thought and felt, with parameters, because there are some things, everybody thinks I've spilled my guts, but I have, nowhere near.
Yes.
But I never tried to create a character. But then who was it who said, was it Goethe or Shakespeare or someone else, that I can't remember how to phrase it properly, but that each one of us are so many characters.
Yes,
so I just
right.
maybe found a different character.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking about the dinner party where, your lamb chop shoots off the
Yes, it really did.
Shoots off the plate, and you spill the wine and on your friend and
my hand.
Yes. So there was a bit of a comic Sharon there.
Yeah, only unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And I guess telling it is, I didn't need to put that in there.
Yes,
but
that's right. Those were choices. Yeah.
And I made the choice to put it in because in a lot of ways, sometimes in essays you get pompous, other writers, never me, but you get,
never you. No.
And you get sort of like full of yourself.
Yeah.
And this is the real me here. I really screwed up like that.
Oh, there's one more little question which we'll squeeze in from Cindy. I find that your assessment of aging is almost completely without a sign of self-pity or fear. In that sense, I would say that you tend to objectify your experience. Any response to that?
Without pity or fear. Well, you're always trying desperately hard not to whine.
Yeah.
And always to remember that I'm one of the fortunate ones. I'm in good health. I've got enough money to live like a regular middle-class person. I have a nice place to live, and nobody is harassing or bothering me in particular. So I keep trying to remember that. I'm surrounded, however, by women like myself who don't have good health. And one of my dearest friends just got the notice last week that she has macular degeneration in both. And that's a bullet I escaped myself. If I were to talk seriously about my fears at 81 and living alone in 1.2 to 4 million person city, it might sound like I was whining. I have very fears. The other day I knew that my blood pressure had shot up incredibly. I have normal blood pressure all the time, but lately when I get upset, and I get upset much more easily, it's like having a beehive in your head.
Yeah.
And you start feeling sick in your stomach, and you think, I have to sit down or I'm going to have a stroke. I've got to calm myself down. And I'm learning to think that before I think I'm calling emergency. I'm calling my husband, who's been dead 14 years, like, who am I going to call? There's nobody to call. And so you get tough. You have to.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't recommend it, but
but that's how it is. Well, I think that we've come to the end there. That's you have to get tough. That's a good ending. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh,
lovely chatting.
Such a pleasure, Liz. Really, I mean it.
Good. I mean it too. Yeah, it's fun.
Thanks to everybody who tuned in too.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yes, and thank you both so much. Thanks for the expert guest hosting, Elizabeth Phillips. And of course, it's always a pleasure to host you, Sharon. Our thanks again to Freehand Books for working with us to make this event happen. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Don't forget to pick up your copy of This Strange Visible Air by Sharon Butala, either in store or online at mcnallyrobinson.com. Yeah, we appreciate your support so much and look forward to being able to safely host events in person again. Until then, please keep an eye on our upcoming events page to find out more about virtual events coming up. And thank you once again to Sharon Butala and our host, Elizabeth Phillips. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Rowan.
And thanks, McNally Robinson.
Yeah.
Thank you both.